This video is part of a series of video instructions on the BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation tool. Actually, there are two BioGrace tools. There is BioGrace 1 for biofuels and BioGrace 2 for electricity, heat and cooling from biomass. This is instruction 4.1, relation between BioGrace and the European Commission and JRC's work on greenhouse gas calculations. In an earlier video instruction, it was already explained that the European Commission is in the lead for greenhouse gas calculations that are used to demonstrate that bioenergy meets sustainability criteria. The Commission has defined the greenhouse gas calculation methodology and has published default values and disaggregated default values which have been calculated by the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, abbreviated as GRC. For biofuels and bioliquids, these default values are legally binding in Europe, as they are part of the Renewable Energy Directive and the Fuel Quality Directive. For electricity, heat and cooling from solid and gaseous biomass, the default values and disaggregated default values are recommendations, as published in the staff working document plus the DRC report from July 2014. The content of this video instruction can be summarized in one sentence. BioGrace follows the Commission and DRC and makes decisions from European and national legislation implementable for stakeholders. The rest of this video instruction gives more detail to this one sentence. I will show you a figure allowing me to give some more detail to what I just said. If you would like to make an LCA, which is a life cycle assessment for the greenhouse gas emissions from biofuels, then there are three basic elements. These are 1. A methodology which defines how the calculations need to be made. 2. Data or numbers as input for the calculation. And 3. Results, which are the output of the calculation. By the way, in an earlier video instruction we mentioned that there are 4 basic elements. There we distinguish 2 types of data, which are the data and numbers as input for the calculation. These are data that a farmer or process operator will know. And background data, like lower heating values and emission coefficients, which are data that an LCA expert will know. Now, for making greenhouse gas calculations to comply with sustainability criteria for bioenergy in Europe, the European Commission, with the help of DRC, has already predefined many of the 3 elements. The methodology has been set as part of annexes to the Renewable Energy Directive, Fuel Quality Directive, and the communication and staff working document for solid and gaseous biomass. Some further Commission documents contain data that are to be used in the calculations. For instance, the decision on guidelines for the calculation of land carbon stocks. The Commission and DRC have also published results in the form of default values and disaggregated default values. This brings me to the company or economic operator that wants to have a greenhouse gas emission result. He can use a default value, but can also make an actual calculation with actual input data from his own cultivation, transport or processing practices. At this point it is important to note that the default values are based on European averages. For instance, for rapeseed, the average cultivation practices from all member states are taken into account, plus import of some rapeseed that was cultivated overseas. Therefore, when an economic operator only takes into account his own feedstock and or biofuel production process, this will lead to different greenhouse gas emission results. In 2009, when the RED was published, we learned that it is not simple to make a greenhouse gas calculation based on the documents from the European Commission and DRC. At that time, many people tried to reproduce the DRC calculations that led to the default values in Annex 5 of the RED, but they did not succeed. This is why we started to develop BioGrace. BioGrace is between the European Commission and DRC, helping economic operators with greenhouse gas calculations. BioGrace does so by providing a number of things. In the first place, BioGrace offers explanations on the European greenhouse gas calculation methodology in a methodological background document, and in more detailed calculation rules on details which the methodology does not fully cover. In the second place, BioGrace offers data in the form of standard values. These are the emission coefficients, lower heating values, and transport efficiencies that are needed to convert input data into greenhouse gas emissions. And thirdly, BioGrace shows how the default values from the European Commission were calculated. Last but not least, it is good to emphasize that scientifically oriented discussions that might lead to additions to the European greenhouse gas calculation methodology are not part of BioGrace. Additions to BioGrace will only be made if the European Commission has amended its methodology. Examples of issues that are being discussed are indirect land use change, including the so-called ILUC factors, and carbon debt. I already told that BioGrace follows the Commission and DRC and makes their decision implementable for stakeholders. We do so by using the data as collected by DRC for making our BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation tools, so that our calculations exactly follow their calculations. By the way, part of the DRC data are public. The links to these data can be found on the About pages of the BioGrace 1 and BioGrace 2 Excel tools. Some of the more detailed data are not public. We receive them from DRC directly. Please note that the BioGrace Excel tools only include pathways for which the European Commission gives a default value. Other biofuel, bioliquid, biogas or solid biomass pathways were not included because, if we would have done so, it might seem that the results of these calculations in the pathways can be used as default values too. BioGrace is not in a position to calculate results that have the same function as default values or disaggregated default values. If a company feels that a certain feedstock bioenergy combination is produced on a commercial scale and should therefore also be included in the default values, then a request to the European Commission or DRC can be made to include such a pathway in their calculations, so that a default value will be included at the next update of RED Annex 5 or a next update of the solid gaseous biomass staff working document. The BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation tools have three uses. In the first place, they make transparent how the default values of the European Commission and DRC were calculated. In the second place, the BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation tools allow stakeholders to make actual calculations. Thirdly, BioGrace aims to harmonize the way in which greenhouse gas calculations are made to meet sustainability criteria. It should not matter which tool is used to make a calculation. The outcome should always be the same. This next slide summarizes the roles and responsibilities of the European Commission plus DRC and of BioGrace. The European Commission decides which pathways are included in the default values. DRC collects data of these pathways and calculates the European average greenhouse gas emission results, which are the typical and default values. The difference between typical and default values is explained in an earlier video instruction. DRC also advises the European Commission on methodological issues, which is not a role of BioGrace, although we have done this a few times over the last years. It is also the role of the Commission and DRC to respond to stakeholder comments and questions on methodology and data used. DRC and BioGrace both have a similar role on explaining how the typical and default values were calculated, and on how the list of standard values, including emission coefficients and lower heating values, was created and distributed. BioGrace has some further roles, which are to create and distribute greenhouse gas Excel tools, make them user-friendly by taking into account stakeholder comments, and last but not least, to organize workshops and trainings to policymakers, verifiers, companies and advisors. The objective of these workshops and trainings is to make users familiar with the BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation tools and to try to make further steps towards harmonized greenhouse gas calculations.